Counting is wonderful, counting is marvelous, counting's terrific and how.
Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. Welcome back to Counting Kryptofreaks. It's time for the 11th episode of Season 3. It's Delete, which is the ultimate Chloe killer episode. That's right, we're going to have more than one Chloe killer in a single episode, and it gets downright hilarious. This is also an episode that I think is written a little bit better than most as far as the character drama stuff goes, so we'll talk about that. Brings back some major story stuff from previously in the season, and from even last season, that you maybe wouldn't have expected to come back. And we're bringing back Summerhold at the same time as we just added in Summerholder. What are the odds of that? Let's go ahead and jump right into it. If you want to watch the episode with me, which I certainly suggest you do, if you are able to, grab your DVDs, your Blu-rays, or your Hulu. And if you're watching on Hulu, just make sure if you're watching with commercials that you're pausing me whenever you get to each commercial. And everybody get ready to press play when I say now. Here we go. We're going to watch and chat about Smallville together once again. I'm so excited about it. Here we go. Everybody, please press play right now. Meanwhile, at the Daily Planet, and of course, this is a location that eventually we're going to be at so much we're going to wonder why the show is still called Smallville, but it still remains kind of a novelty right now whenever we get to go here. There's going to be a little bit of a sting in the score here. Listen for it. There it is, that is very Lois and Clark, and I don't know if that's intentional or not. It might not have been on Mark Snow's part, but it's super subtle, and if he did it on purpose, I really applaud him there. That's really cool, but it sounds a little bit like the intro for Lois and Clark. So Chloe is having to leave her column, and I honestly didn't realize that she even had a desk at the Daily Planet. That's kind of weird. You'd think if you were going to give a column to a high school kid that's a couple hours away or more, we are never consistent about how long it takes to drive to Metropolis in this show, that you would have her just email in her stories. We have this kind of awkward thing still at the turn of the century with a lot of shows and movies dealing with journalism, but especially this show, where it cannot decide just how dead print is in this world. And we're already at a place where there's no good reason that she would have to actually go to the office and do any of her work. And it seems like that's just there in this scene so that we can have a standard, having to lose your job and walk out and take all your stuff with you and that kind of tragic, sad scene. It's also here so that we can be in the Daily Planet when we introduce the name Lois Lane. We reveal here that Lois is Chloe's cousin, and I don't think anybody expected that with that name drop we would in the very next season. I love that Luthor Corp logo in the background there. That is really cool. I don't think we would have... Was that a Battlefield Earth poster? I didn't notice that before. We wouldn't have expected that we would get her in the very next season, but that is indeed what happens. And I'm not sure if they were intentionally setting that up, if in, Goff and Miller's back pocket, they were like, we know we're going to do Lois next season, and that's us setting that up, or if they decided that later on at the 11th hour, now that they had set it up, if maybe they just couldn't help themselves. I still think it's really wild that we end up with Lois as a main character for well over half of this series, for 7 out of the 10 seasons. Much longer than I even would have expected this show to run. When this started, I was hoping for a good solid 5 years. It ended up with 10. And Lois Lane, a character that you wouldn't think Clark would meet until he moved to Metropolis and became Superman, ends up in it for 7 seasons. But then this is a reimagining thing. Name dropping her like that and then adding her later is not necessarily a bad idea. We'll get to all that next season. It's not going to be too long now. So this character, Molly, I'm going to be questioning this whole time whether or not she's actually a Kryptofreak. It's the exact same thing with Ryan, which is interesting because both of them were held in Summerhold Institute, and I have no idea how they got their powers. I'm also a little bit unsure of what exactly her powers are. It has something to do with being able to encode files in emails and turning people into killers. I don't know what exactly her ability is. Maybe I'll pick up on it better on this viewing, but watching this in preparation, I was a little bit confused about that. She is going to be one of the first characters, maybe the first, that gets an actual villain alias in Brainwave, and there is indeed a DC character named Brainwave that has, as far as I can tell, little to nothing to do with this character. So I'm going to be counting that as a DC character brought into the show, but I actually don't know if that was a coincidence or not. So we're going to have this whole thing with computers in this episode, and kind of cybercrime, or supernatural cybercrime, I guess, that's all going to spin out of Chloe's. Initially, we think Chloe's now kind of war with Lionel, and then it turns out to actually not have anything to do with that. This is a thing I rarely say, there's an irritating line that Lex has later, where he says, where he gets kind of upset with Chloe for assuming that it's Lionel, or Chloe or Clark, I can't remember who he's talking to in that scene, and says that he's not responsible for every nefarious deed in Smallville. And first of all, Smallville, even though it's bigger than the show pretends like it is, as I'm always saying, it's small enough that there shouldn't be nearly as much nefarious stuff happening in that town that there is, and all not connected to Lionel. That's the first thing. The second thing is, he gets really lucky that this time around it turns out that that's not the case. And third, I don't know why he also would not jump to that conclusion initially, considering everything that's happened this season with what Chloe has uncovered about Lionel's parentage. So we've got a car crash here. So much stuff to count this episode. This is probably the episode with the most things in the categories that I point out in this show that we've had all season. I've got an entire page of stuff this time, and it will be fun to go down the list when we get to the end. You don't expect Clark to step out at the end of the scene, although is that his truck? Is that the truck he's been driving around, or did he just get into somebody else's random truck? We don't, if that is his truck, because I thought he had a blue one. I've lost track of what he's usually driving around right now, because we've had so many car crashes in this show. Somebody in the comments maybe can tell me if you've been keeping better track of what exactly Clark and his parents have been driving around, and if the show is even consistent about keeping track of what their cars are, because this is a family. They should, like, that might sound like kind of an arbitrary or pointless thing, minor thing to deal with, to be really consistent with, but this is not a well-to-do family, and they constantly have money problems. I mean, in the middle of season 2, they were able to get past their money woes way too easily, but I think either this episode or the previous episode, Jonathan even talks about how they're hurting for cash again, and they're barely making ends meet. And so we should be careful about the way the Kens are spending their money, and this is not a family that would very easily be able to just hurry up and replace a car. So I continue to like this sheriff. I like how down-to-earth she is, and how clear it is to her that she is in a weird place where very strange things are happening. She does not seem to take this stuff lightly. She's not an idiot. I kind of wish we had done more with her, and with Sheriff Adams, and had her figure out the Kryptofreak thing at some point, and maybe not get clued into Clark's secret, although of course that would have been interesting, but to be maybe more on his case and down the path of figuring that out as Lex is, but with, of course, with very different motivations. When she's first introduced, and she's kind of not giving Clark any slack, and is really suspicious of his activities, always showing up to crime scenes and stuff, I really thought that's where we were going, and ultimately, like with so many things, she ends up being kind of a missed opportunity, I think. So, love triangle face all the way around here. We're going to see a lot more of that at the end of this episode. We are finally turning this into a real love triangle. Kind of took our time on that a little bit. Introduced Ian a couple of episodes ago. Had him and Lana say, no, we're just friends at the end of that episode. It was really obvious that that wouldn't stick, especially because he's recurring and he's going to keep popping in. This is exactly the arc you would expect it to go. Once again, kind of a missed opportunity. The idea of Lana dating a guy that is really candid about everything and that won't put up with her crap, and with the fact that she, as he says in this episode, never says what she's thinking and always, goes for subtext, and she's passive aggressive. I really like the idea of her growing up a little bit, dating a guy that isn't going to put up with that stuff, and starting to maybe get out of her shell and get a little bit more down to earth herself. And this episode is kind of pushing us toward that maybe happening a little bit. One thing I appreciate about the way the relationship stuff is handled here, because we're dealing with all the stuff that is a Battlefield Earth poster, the which belongs to this guy, I'm sure. And I don't know. I think we should have actually established the geeky stuff in this room better when we first introduced it, because you're supposed to be, especially in this day and age, in 2003, 2004, we're supposed to be surprised that we come in here and the girl working on the computers is this really attractive woman that doesn't look like not to put too fine a point on it, this guy, and they're kind of making a big point of that, like, oh, this is the guy that you would have expected to see, and what was that Molly girl doing there. And of course, that's all really stereotypical, and of course, every kind of person can be interested in every kind of thing, and can do every kind of job, but that being the point they were trying to make with that, I would have made it clearer that those things were there to kind of throw you off the track a little bit, I guess. But anyway, we continue to further all the relationship stuff, drama, or excuse me, all the relationship drama stuff, and the issues that we've had between Chloe and Clark in this episode. And everybody still has the same motivations that they have. There's still as much drama. There's still as all those arguments. Although we are at the end of this going to kind of patch things up with Chloe and Clark a little bit. And I appreciate that this script just has a better handle on where everybody is coming from, and gives me a good sense as to whether or not the show thinks that what Lana specifically is doing is endearing or not. By having, and that's often my issue with her is, okay, she is, I think, again, being kind of passive-aggressive and not giving her friend Clark the benefit of the doubt, and is very often being kind of juvenile and childish about things, and really, kind of entitled. It's not a problem that we're telling a story about a character that's doing that. The question is, does the show think that's endearing or not? What am I supposed to take from it? And sometimes it plays it like she's in the right when she very clearly isn't, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that the people around her are putting up with it and are all right with it. And this episode does not have that problem. It says no, she has been being kind of selfish. She has been being kind of juvenile, and there are consequences for that. And so I'm a lot more okay with it here, especially if she starts to learn and grow from it, and it looks like she could. Same thing with Chloe and Clark in this. Chloe throws. This is great. Where she says, because Clark is complaining that she's been investigating him and working with Lionel. And she says, I did that in a moment of weakness, and this whole episode is about people making big mistakes in a moment of weakness and having to claw their way back from it. And last episode, she kind of throws that back in his face, and it feels unwarranted. And in this episode, now that some time has passed, and it's just a better written scene, I'm buying that a lot more, where, like, he's still holding on to that, and she has apologized, and she's, not pretending like what she did was okay, and Clark is still not letting it go. And this is an extreme situation where I would understand him, and I do understand him not fully trusting her, working with Lionel to investigate him, especially because he knows what his secret is and she doesn't. But this is an extreme case where he expected her to help him out and to and hope that their relationship could continue after his moment of weakness in Metropolis. And when she throws that back in his face, it is a lot better than that scene last episode where when she says, "I thought you of all people would understand," and just walks away and doesn't even have the conversation. In this, it's like, look, I gave you, every opportunity when that happened with you to put your life back together, and it was personal there too. You told me to get away from you and to stay out of my life, and it's not exactly the same thing because it is personal, but what she did to him was much more of an attack. Also, I don't fully buy her saying that she didn't really mean any malice by it, because it did feel like a vengeance thing. But putting that aside for a second, I don't know, it just, like I said, is, I think, better written, and what she's saying is more understandable, and Clark ends up agreeing with me that that she does have a point there, and at the end they manage to patch things up, and I end up buying that. So we just have characters that feel more like real people in this episode than they often do. We really like to do this kind of CGI stuff a lot in the show, where we go inside a person to get a sense of what exactly is physically happening to them, and a lot of those effects end up looking kind of cheesy, especially almost 20 years later, or 15, 16 years later. But it's trying really hard to look cinematic and to look kind of smart about the sci-fi stuff. So now we got Lana. So a lot of our main characters are going to turn into Chloe killers this episode. This is a really elaborate fight scene, and really impressive, I think. Pretty well choreographed. Reminds me a little bit of some of the stuff that happens at the end of the second season of Cobra Kai, which just came out last year. I don't need some of the slow-mo, I guess, but other than that, and it's so over the top and insane, Lana should probably be knocked out by now, or at least really super cut up. I realize she is hyped up on adrenaline, and she's being affected by this brainwave thing, where she's basically mind-washed right now, but still, that wouldn't give her super strength or extra durability or anything. I wonder if she could do some of the things she's doing right now if it wasn't for Alexa's training with her. This is a Power Ranger Lana moment, certainly. Because we don't see anybody else start pulling out the karate moves when they get brainwashed by Brainwave. But yeah, what an ambitious fight. And this was kind of the big highlight for this episode for a lot of fans. Obviously just the insane novelty, I guess, of seeing these two characters having to fight and go at it. And obviously, I'm going to say there is a little bit of a sexual gratuity thing to that scene. In our textbook, in the season 3 official companion, there's some talk about that, where Goff and Miller and whoever directed this episode, because I forget his name, promised that would not be a gratuitous scene sexually. And these two actresses were both a little bit worried about that. And I don't know, does it have to wind up in a girl's locker room? I'm just saying, if they're saying it's not supposed to be that, it kind of watches like it's supposed to be that. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff, that kind of TNA stuff in this show, I think. So now we're starting to figure out what is causing our characters to not be themselves. So much characters not themselves episodes this season, and a bunch of them almost back to back. It's nice that in this episode, it's not like the novelty of an entire episode of watching a character not act like they usually do, but just a very temporary thing where basically their bodies become vessels for this character that wants to go after Chloe. So now we've got Ian being brought in to actually be part of the story and help out our characters a little bit. When I said earlier that this is all going to go exactly the way you expect it to, the art for this is usually Lana or Chloe, just a main female character in the show, but usually Lana, meets some guy and they fall for each other, and then ultimately the guy tries to kill her and turns into a raging psychopath. And I guess that's what happens with Lex, with a lot of his love interests as well. I like that we addressed that here because he immediately finds Molly interesting and would have tried to go out with her if she didn't turn out to be a nutcase. And lucky he didn't go that far this time, because the first time I saw this, as soon as I saw her, I went, oh, Lex is going to marry her, and then she's going to try to murder him. And it ends up being a one-and-done kind of thing, so that doesn't happen. I think Lex in the show looks great in a long coat, and he should wear those more often. I also really appreciate the location shooting that we have here. I'm assuming that this is still in Vancouver. This must be in the kind of metropolitan business area of Vancouver, and I'm not familiar with that city at all, so I don't know, but I'm assuming that that's probably where they shot this, since that's where this show is shot. But these buildings are sufficiently metropolitan looking enough for me to buy that this is Metropolis, and some kind of interesting architecture. So I don't know if any of those buildings are large enough to be considered skyscrapers, but and look at that monitor. It is the early 2000s. So we got Gardner back, and this is the guy that runs Summerholt, and we introduced him in Ryan, and he's gonna be a recurring character now. He's gonna keep popping in. Because he and Lex are going to work together in trying to, as we reveal at the end of this episode, and I think this episode has a pretty good cliffhanger, that Lex really wants to get his memories back, and this guy might have a way to do that because he's been experimenting on people, and specifically with neuroscience. And he works with people who have special abilities, and I can't tell if any of them, again, are ever Kryptofreaks. But and it's not a problem if they're not. I don't need every, pseudo-supernatural thing in the show to be created by kryptonite. It's nice if it's not, because the world of Superman, of course, is much larger than that, and he comes from space after all, and so it's cool, especially if we want to build a larger DC universe in the show, which, as I've talked about before, from the very beginning, it seems like we're kind of interested in doing, in at least name dropping some other superheroes and stuff, and eventually we will have a whole Justice League basically, but so it makes a lot of sense that we would have some other, metahumans and freaks that aren't Kryptofreaks, but we don't make it really clear where some of those powers come from. So Lana continues to be fixated on this notion of getting out of this town, and I'm starting to wonder this episode how much of that has to do with Clark and with the fact that she wishes she could be with him but doesn't understand him, and that whole thing is just not going to come together. And at the end of the season, I think it becomes pretty clear that he has a lot to do with why she leaves, even though I think she claims it doesn't, if memory serves. This does seem, again, to be a guy that on face value is maybe good for her, and it's not initially a bad idea if she just jumped into a relationship with him. I mean, he said he didn't want to be Rebound Boy, but she and Clark didn't really have a relationship for very long, and it is probably time for her to move on if neither of them are willing, or together willing to commit to that. At the same time, I guess I get, like she's, because I forgot about this, that in the scene she's saying, you seem to be a mystery. How did you know those martial arts and everything? And the thing with Ian is, he is not altogether convincing in the scene that she's just being paranoid, and there was no reason for us to be suspicious of him until this point, and it does seem like at this point that we are supposed to be somewhat suspicious of him, or maybe that's a little bit confused. Like, whose side in that scene are we supposed to be on? That is kind of a question. Like, is it that she is being paranoid, and so at the end it's supposed to be, kind of a relief, and like we're supposed to be happy for her that she's starting to maybe put together a relationship with this guy who would be better for her right now than Clark is, and that she can kind of use to help her grow up a little bit. I don't know why Chloe was like freaked out and surprised by Clark when she walked in. Like, yeah, she's you had all these people attacking her, and so she's paranoid and freaked out, and I get that. But like, he announced his presence. It wasn't like she walked in and he turned around and like spooked her. He was just like trying to do everything he could to make sure that she was not freaked out, but it just didn't work. So nice sense of continuity here. We've reminded the audience that Ryan was being held in Summerhold. That's not a thing that feels too much like exposition and dialogue, although there's a lot of that kind of thing in in the show. It's not as bad about that this episode, but when he's like, wasn't that where Ryan was held? It's like, they've only dealt with Summerhold the one time. That name hasn't come up a ton. I buy that line. So that's not bad. I think the answer to why she would want to kill Chloe Clark is, well, we already had a Lana stalker not that long ago in an episode, so now it's Chloe's turn. Remember, we have Lana stalkers and we have Chloe killers, because Chloe is just, according to this show, not attractive enough to be stalked, but certainly she can be attacked. And now we're going to have a gruesome death by pencil. This is a woman who is also going to be mind-controlled. Evil for just a moment, Maureen, who kills this guy by pencil. The pencil trick, like 5 years before the Joker and Dark Knight did it. 4 or 5 years, and then we're gonna zoom out and see it, and that's absolutely insane. This show likes to go to crazy reanimator places sometimes. This is another one of those kind of horror-themed episodes, and it's got a nice moodiness to it, which I really like, but I still remain a little bit confused as to why from the beginning the show thought, Superman origin, let's go to a constant kind of creepy B-horror place with it. Again, X-Files was in the air, Buffy was in the air, and I think it's an easy place to go to when you're doing a small town show, especially that's going to have superpowers in it, and also just in trying to figure out how you're going to fill 22 episodes of time if you're not going to have one big long running narrative and go episodic at all. I mean, it's not that far of a stretch in this show, Clark. Yeah, I mean, you can tell just looking at Dr. Garner that he's a crazy person. You can just tell, you know. You don't want to profile people based on eyebrows, but you can kind of tell. We can tell from this scene the very important character trait that Lex really likes orange juice. He's an orange juice drinker. I don't know if it's freshly squeezed. He's an orange juice drinker. When we establish buildings in the show, we like to zoom in on the name of it and then tilt up. I don't know why that is, but that's how we introduce buildings in the show. That's how we establish them. I don't know if we should call this a retcon or not, but suddenly Garner is talking about having patience. When Clark came in looking for Ryan, he said, this is a neurological institute, we do research here, but we don't have patients. And now he's moved the goalpost to, we have patients, but we're still quite above board, everybody. And I find that quite curious. I don't know if the show forgot about that, or if now he's just not even trying to hide it and is still spinning it as there's nothing illegal about what we were doing. So I like that line a lot, some imaginary high school investigation. We don't point out enough that Clark and Chloe are high school kids when they're investigating things. Now, they can certainly pass for being college students are older because they are that age, the actual actors, and I wouldn't think that Clark or Chloe or Lana would ever have to walk into a bar and worry about getting carded. So now we're going to use our new superpower that we just got last episode. And not as conveniently as we did before, because now he's using it on purpose when he knows an important phone call is happening. So that's good. So Garner has this fixation with Molly. He's studying her because she has this kind of vague ability, but he also finds her attractive and seems to be kind of hoping something will come of that. Every man that gets very close to her face in the show feels the need to touch it. And she is another character, just in the limited time she's here, that the show seems to be saying, clearly, obviously, isn't she, like, one of the most attractive women you've ever seen? People here don't say what they think. I love this show coming out and saying that. Now, it means that Lana really needs to start changing and growing from this when she pretty clearly, if not reluctantly, kind of agrees that that is a problem. But I like that you got this kind of outsider that comes in and feels almost like a new audience member is saying, these are the things that are kind of irritating about watching this show. All you people have to do is communicate, and you'd solve a lot of your problems. And again, sometimes it feels like the show is saying that these are high school kids and they don't know what they're doing, they haven't found themselves yet, and they don't have the kind of maturity to work those problems out and to have that kind of communication. And sometimes it plays like that is supposed to be the endearing thing, which is really frustrating and aggravating to me. And this episode has swung the pendulum back to these are kids, and this guy has had some life experience and is a little bit more streetwise, and he is calling out the fact that these are kids kind of playing at being adults, and that they need to grow up if they're going to have these kinds of relationships. And I really appreciate that in the moment. Obviously, I'm not going to care about him ultimately, and the way that's going to end is going to be, kind of boring and pointless and sucks. But in the moment, right here, it's kind of nice that he comes out and says that. Now, the whole she's an amazing person thing, I don't entirely know where he's getting that. Sure, she miraculously got through that physical therapy way faster than she should have, but that seemed to be script logic before it was anything. But everything before that I liked a lot. So there's that. But they do have that we're pretty people, and that's ultimately why we're getting together thing, like I said last time. We used this shot a lot with Metropolis, I think. Lex says I'm starting to get a complex. He says seems all the women that I find even vaguely interesting or attractive wind up being psychopaths. And it's interesting that he comes right out and just says that to her. I don't know what he thinks is going to happen. I also don't know what Clark thinks is happening when he walks in with that scene. Again, Lex is a man who gets within a couple inches of her and feels the need to touch her face. The giant eye is kind of creepy. I like it. This is a character that I think is a little bit of a missed opportunity. I think we could have done some cool stuff with, more cool stuff with her. What's here is okay, but she ends up just being kind of a standard Kryptofreak, even though I don't know if she's actually affected by kryptonite. But she's maybe a little bit more sympathetic than most. In that, at least I get where her revenge is coming from, and it doesn't feel as forced and contrived as a lot of Kryptofreaks do. She seems like a Stephen King character to me. Now, she will be a dime a dozen kind of character as time goes on. There will be a lot of these. but like she's upset because people have never treated her like she's normal and like a real person. I would think if I were her, I would also extend that to men that are kind of chauvinist around her, because she seems to be dealing with that a lot too, but she's got other things on her mind. Maybe she's not even noticing them. I also think she's taking advantage of that fact a little bit when it comes to Garner. So here comes our third now set of Chloe killers. And we've got Clark's parents once again being compromised by our Freak of the Week. Now we get to watch them be insane, crazy killers. I know there was a contingent of fans that watched the show that didn't like Chloe and found her annoying. I know my stepdad was like that. And Jeff liked this episode because he got to watch Chloe almost die in several scenes. And he told me that at the end of this, the only thing he didn't like about it was that she was still alive. That's how much he disliked Chloe. And so I was laughing this episode because of that. Because I'm just imagining Jeff like applauding every time she gets attacked like this. I've always wondered why kryptonite glows whenever it comes in contact with her and is in close proximity to Clark. Like, does anything else... I mean, I know it comes from another planet, but does anything on the periodic table react that way? I mean, like, I know some things react to radiation and stuff, but, like, Clark is the thing that the radiation is affecting, not the other way around, so I was kind of wondered about that. We do quite a few action scenes in the series in the barn, I suspect partly because it has a really high ceiling and it's a large location, and it's easy to have big fist fights in. If I'm Chloe right now, I'm just like not even leaving my house, you know. I do think maybe it's taken a little bit too long for Summerholt to come back if we were going to bring it back in this way. Like, why is she just now getting around to publishing this article about it? I mean, yeah, she's publishing it in the Daily Planet. I guess maybe she... Okay, I'm going to assume maybe she wrote about it in the high school paper, and then now that she has this column with the Daily Planet, she's finally doing it here. I'm also not sure how long she's had... No, because Norman Bates wouldn't live that high up. He would be on the ground. But I'm not sure how long she's been there now. It's hard to tell sometimes how much time passes between episodes. We know a whole month passed between Shattered and Asylum. And so she's probably had that desk at the Daily Planet for at least, what do you think, 3 months? 2.5, 3 months? So if I'd been her, that would have been a priority for me, and I would have probably tried to publish that earlier, although maybe she's just being strategic, and she's like, well, everybody's going to think I'm... people might think I'm making it up if the first thing I publish is this thing about Summerhold. And also, I don't know what her column is supposed to be. Like, is it an opinion column? Or is it straight up news? Like, I don't know even what kind of a column it's supposed to be. So Lex has brought her computers back. And they're going to kind of patch things up here a little bit. I feel like we're finally moving on from this, Chloe is obsessed with Clark and hates him for not finding her as attractive as he finds Lana. I wish, of course, that we'd gotten there faster, and I wish that we had more of a roadmap of what exactly we were going to do with the whole emo Chloe thing at the end of last season, because it seems the show likes to write itself into corners, and then instead of getting creatively inspired by doing that, it goes, oh crap, I don't know what I want to do now, and then tries to contrive some way to get to claw out of that hole instead of digging deeper and then coming out the other side, which is what you want to do when you write yourself into a hole. So again, the weak moment thing, that's kind of what this episode's all about. At least with them, like, I kind of wish we had maybe paralleled that a little bit with Molly. We could have made her more interesting and even more sympathetic, more of a tragic character, I should say, if the deal there was more, she was picked up in a vulnerable point of her life by Garner instead of kind of using him. Like, I guess she thinks that he is... I guess it is supposed to be the same thing, where she thinks that Garner has her best intentions at heart and actually really doesn't. But that could have come together thematically in a more organic and interestingly parallel way, I think. But I guess that is what it's supposed to be. That's a nice scene. This is one of those episodes where you find yourself wondering where it's going to end. Smallville has this a lot, where we take out the Kryptofreak. This one we took out, pretty quick, pretty easy, and then you have a bunch of epilogue scenes, and we're like wrapping up stuff. So we've got, like, we could have ended with Ian gets the apartment, and then we could have ended with Clark and Chloe are patching things up and putting their relationship back together. But we actually ended here, and I'm glad we do, because we've had a lot of ending on relationship drama stuff lately, and this is kind of a nice this is a nice scene to end on, because it's kind of a big bombshell drop, and it kind of rewards fans for paying attention. And it kind of takes a risk, right? Because this show is always worried that it's going to lose people. And if you've not been watching the show, if you missed the two-parter, you won't really understand the significance of the end of the scene when Lex says, I want to get those 6 weeks back. Because the reason that there's such a big dramatic sting in the score at the end of this is because Lex will find out Clark's secret again if he gets those memories back. And of course it's teasing us with that because we know that ultimately at the end of the day, Lex Luthor cannot know that Clark Kent is Superman. Although with a reimagining thing, there's always that question of how far will it go and would it allow those sorts of things to happen. So I'm saying that somewhat in hindsight, because at the end of the day, when you finish the show, we know that it was not willing to do that, and this makes that amnesia thing at the end of the whole series even more irritating. Now that I'm going back and looking at it, but we'll talk about all that down the line. So yeah, this is a fine episode. It's not one of my favorites or nothing. But like I said, it's better written than most, particularly in the relationship drama department, and it's a little bit more thoughtful than these things sometimes are. Let's go ahead and go on to the count now, shall we? We have maybe a Kryptofreak, probably not a Kryptofreak. She wasn't anywhere in Metropolis, or excuse me, in Smallville with the meteor shower, so I'm not going to count that as Kryptofreak, but but Molly's your bad guy. And then we have sort of a DC character in Molly as Brainwave, but I don't even know if that was intentional. We've got a blatant DC reference in Chloe's cousin being Lois Lane. That's another Superman gag kind of thing, but ultimately it does pay off, so it feels a little bit less gimmicky, even though they do it a lot earlier than I think we probably should have. We have 3 Chloe killers, which is hilarious. 3 or 4, I guess 4, because Clark's parents are 2 different people, of course. So yeah, I wrote that down wrong, but we have 4 Chloe killers, which is great. And I guess we should say 5, because Molly herself would be a Chloe killer, but because she turns other people into Chloe killers, they all count too. So 5 Chloe killers. And then we have a car crash. We have a love triangle that we are establishing here 2 episodes after we introduced Ian, so I'm just now counting that as a love triangle. And then we have a bunch of characters that are not themselves. Also, that's going to count, I guess, as 4 now, because we got Clark, Lana, and his parents. Curiously, Lex does not end up being used as a character who is going off and trying to kill Chloe, because I might have expected that we would use that as another excuse to put a gun in his hand so he can start shooting at people. We have one instance of Power Ranger Lana. I want to start mentioning those. And finally, we have, well, okay, this is interesting. So we don't have somebody walking away because they're angry, but we do have a scene where we make someone else walk away because you're angry, where we say leave, and then they leave, and then it's basically the same kind of dramatic situation. I'm going to give this episode a 3. I mean, this is a solid Smallville episode. It is certainly better than last week's episode. It is kind of a standard Smallville horror thing, but like I said, I like the writing overall better than a lot of episodes. I appreciate bringing back some of the story stuff from earlier that I didn't think would come back yet, and is not all just the stuff that we've been dealing with the last few episodes, and it's just got kind of a nice general moodiness to it that's pretty cool. Next time, we're going to deal with Hereafter, which is an interesting episode in hindsight because of all the things that kind of make it not work at all. Hereafter is the episode with the Kryptofreak that can see the future and can see that Clark's life doesn't end. And that ends up getting really problematic later on, so that'll be kind of fun to talk about. And anyway, in the meantime, thanks so much for watching this episode with me. I hope you had a good time, and I will see you again in just a couple of days. I'm Captain Logan, and consider this episode counted.